Welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. Today, I get to talk with Brian O'Shea, who an amazing man who has a history of intelligence, but also has been able to look at current situations that are happening around this world, and working with many different people in different avenues. We have a great discussion about not only how to determine kind of what threats are real, what gossips are real, what's not, because so much in our world today, we get so much information and don't know what we could process, what to prioritize, what to put here, what not to put there. And then on top of that, we had even a different conversation about our youth, because he and I both work with youth at different levels. And what we see is, particularly with young men, we see so many young men that don't understand their responsibilities as men, don't have the ability to be able to move out and move forward as men and be able to do so. And I think a large part of that has to do with how we're training them, and also how, again, we process that information for them. And it can be as simple ways of making an impact in their lives. But it's something that we all should be able to do and take away from this, is not only how we can process and get information, but also how to be able to pass it down and create actionable information for our young men, for our young people, to be able to go and do something with, so that we can help lead as we move into this next world. I think it's absolutely critical that we do this as we move forward into this next in this next season of our lives. So with that being said, here's the interview with me and Brian. Really excited to talk with Brian. Brian, I've been kind of researching you and reading a lot about you before we started to talk, and seeing your background there. You seem like kind of a Bud Light drinking, Target shopping kind of guy. Am I off on that a little bit? Or you? No. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about your background a little bit. Your background fascinates me. So can you tell us all about your background a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, what times we live in, that I had to actually think on the Target shopping, but like drinking, because that used to be okay.
Right, exactly.
So it took me a second to catch up with the times. Never liked Bud Light though. So my background, I got into the intelligence community at 18 years old,
Oh,
and
wow.
I was sent to language school in the military. I joined the army, where I learned Arabic. And I did that for about 2 years, and I learned all sorts of crypto and signals intelligence, and ended up going to 101st Airborne, and then subsequently went into 5th Special Forces, which deals with the Middle East and North Africa. After 11 years in the military, which also took me mainly to Southeast Asia, that area of operations, I went into government intelligence as a contractor. This is right after 9/11, so it was a really big market for people like me, with the clearance level I had, and I did that for quite some time, and different types of work. The client, you're basically part of the workforce, except you're a contractor, so very long-term 5-year contracts as part of the mission of the different agencies. But I felt I hated not knowing what my work was doing. Was it helping people? I knew it wasn't hurting people. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, but you never knew. Yeah, there was never any feedback, and that could sound selfish. I should be all mission first, but when you're throwing intelligence into a black hole and hoping it's making a difference, it is frustrating. And I was also very worried that once Bin Laden was killed, it seemed likely to me that clearances would dry up and they'd want to reduce that workforce. Hence the reason why they had contractors. So I got into competitive intelligence, which is the same thing, recruiting assets and getting intelligence from human sources. And much like an investigative journalist, that took me to a lot of healthcare. That took me to a lot of China, India, South America, you name it, going to trade shows and getting people to tell me things that, well, they probably shouldn't have, on behalf of my client. Then I kind of got tired of that, and it seemed a bit unethical to me, and I started my own firm. And one day I got a call from my now wife, who was getting death threats, And so I went to go help her out and took care of her problem. And we started dating and subsequently got married. And since then, pretty much I've been doing the same work. But since COVID, it's morphed into, wow, I have all this gear and all these skills, and no one's doing anything because everyone's locked down. So thank God I was married to an investigative journalist. We were both like 24/7 just researching things here at a what we lovingly call Liberty Lair, because we're both watching the patterns and saying, man, a lot of this stuff seems is just something really off here. And the rest is pretty much a public history at that point.
So I'm curious. So I I'm in the restaurant business primarily, is what I grew up in, and we hire a lot of people who are kind of crazy. And I've gotten my share of death threats, and most of the time we kind of just blow them off. Every now and then we have a file for some of the super crazy people. I got one stalker in jail from it. But when you're investigating death threats on her in particular, when that was happening, there's those that just right. And I'm sure since you've come out on the stuff that about COVID, et cetera, you've had more than your share of people who've made vague threats, et cetera. How do you make the determination of what is a real threat and what is some guy that just doesn't know how to be sophisticated to tell you that he's angry?
That is a fantastic question. I wish more people asked it and applied it. Um, they'd save a lot of time and anxiety. The way you determine, the way I determine if something is an acute threat, something that needs to be disrupted right away. Um, First thing I look for is any sort of an escalation, and
Okay.
then in terms of frequency of threat. But then I also look for specificity of the threat. Details like saying I'm gonna kill you is less dangerous or less alarming than someone saying I'm gonna kill you, on Wednesday night at your favorite chicken place. And then they're showing you they've gotten details. And that's really where if I get some time and place details, and even if nothing happens, even if they're 3 countries away and bluffing, is certainly not a chance I'm going to let the client take, or let anyone take. You have to, because they only have to miss once. I can never miss
Right.
in
Right.
terms of deflecting. So that's how I determine it. And I mean, a lot of it is experience. You, you see so many of these things. I've had other clients with stalkers. Actually, a very public one I had was Lily Baldwin. She's a well-known choreographer in New York, and she's a friend of a friend. And she had called me, and she had a major stalking case that was actually in Glamour magazine. And it was the same thing with that. It's like these were very acute threats, but this guy is overseas. So really it became a thing of deflecting him from messing up her career. And so it case by case, but the more you see, the more there's a pattern that emerges, and you look for
Right.
that pattern.
Hmm. you know and then again, the same thing's true for you, and now that you're married. And again, I guess for me, like my wife, she hears this, so she hears people say, because I'm a very outspoken person, so she hears people say these things about it, and it hurts her personally, because that's the person she married, the person she loves. Yeah, it's the same with the situation between the two of you, and I know y'all are at some point in time. Do you just kind of get numb to it? I mean, recognizing there's maybe a seriousness to it, but where like the emotional component to it, like if somebody's listening to it and they, because you get a lot of people who's like, oh, well, they said something bad about me. Oh, they hurt my feelings. There seems to be something a little bit more when you have it at that level. How do y'all handle it, both with each other and with yourselves? Do you ever just kind of be like, man, I just wish I wasn't hated by everybody? Do you ever kind of get through that, or how do you deal with that on an emotional level?
And yeah, another great question. I mean, day by day, and actually no one says they hate me. No, it's they always attack her, and they tend to avoid me in those attacks. I certainly welcome them. I believe in the First Amendment, but um, I would say for me, and I can certainly empathize with your wife if she's seeing that happen, because it's really hard to sometimes it's hard to be on the sidelines, and especially with my background, it's a different kind of enemy. Like if someone came up and said something to my wife that they say online, I'd probably put them in the hospital pretty quickly. But online, when it's hundreds or thousands of, you don't know if they're bots or humans, it's literally like swatting at a swarm of what we call here in the woods no-see-ums, these little gnats where you swat and they move and morph.
Right.
And I think what happens is you just ignore it. You don't respond to it. Um, and but you do have to bleed off that frustration. And this actually just last night, you think you have it under control. And I just man, I was just very angry, and I realized I didn't even know why I was angry. So I started writing and just see what would come out. And that's what came out, is like you have all these people had, making judgments on someone you love, and they don't know her.
Right.
They
Right.
don't know. I had some idiot say that, oh, she just admitted she got the jab, and he had a still frame of a video. Like, and I'm like, look, anyone, that's idiotic, but the amount of fighting she's done against these sorts of
Right.
things, they're just, there's just certain things that they bother you, and you have to bleed them off somehow, work out. I do a lot of shooting. She actually likes to shoot now. But I think it's more about focusing on those positive people and the people you can help, and trying. She's wonderful. I'm a dark soul compared to her, but she's really helped because she'll tell me try to love everyone. She says that all the time, no matter how nasty people are. And that's really difficult for me to do. And I think it takes more strength to have empathy than it is to seek retribution sometimes. And unfortunately, I just don't have that kind of strength at her level in terms of that empathy. But every day you just work on it. It takes practice. And I think love and empathy for your common man and then the people close to you is the best way to get through it. Focus on, again, the light rather than the darkness.
It's that's interesting because Jesus talks about that, and he's talking to an audience when he's telling them to love and forgive that didn't want to love and forgive, and it is difficult. There are many times, and again, even like with my child's at Auburn, and where she was working, her boss was mean to her, and like I had every desire just to drive down there. I mean, I just and it's like she's 19 years old. She's perfectly capable of handling herself, probably better than I can handle things. But it's that protective instinct that I think as men that we have. But that's the other thing too. I don't know. Are you seeing this from, again? Because obviously you're working in an industry and you're probably working around younger men that are coming up. Are you seeing a change in men being men in your industry and that type I see it a lot in mine, but I'm curious, in your industry, are you seeing that kind of weakness of men that seems to be happening now?
Absolutely. I've seen men. Well, I've seen this from two angles. It seems like men in general, mainly that I'd say like 19 to about 35 age group, um, seem to be not only getting weaker, but less defined, less interested, less curious, less excited about things. And they're just kind of these soulless, you know, hunks of flesh shuffling around. That's what I feel like when I see that age group. For the most part, there's exceptions, um, but I am seeing it bottoming out. And what I found is that those very same men are hungry for kind of like that hero's journey, that Joseph Campbell moment. And I do believe that's how organizations that ran like Black Lives Matter or this Jewish Voice for Peace, who's these people who are behind some pretty violent protests. Um, I think they play on that, whether they do it, whether they realize they're doing it or not. I've talked to a lot of these young men who run down to these protests because that is their Fallujah, that is their joining the army moment, that is their jumping out of the plane moment, that is their adventure. That a lot of times they don't even know what the cause is; they're just running to the adventure. And so I'm talking to a lot more men, and I try to give them as much as I can. The ones that I run into, hey, come on out to the house. let's ride the ATVs, let's shoot some guns, let's chop some wood, and then let's learn how to ride an op-ed. Those, because I think people need adventure, and I'm getting a lot of those men in that age group reaching out to me and saying, hey, do you have any work? They could get a job anywhere, and some of these are like Columbia grads, but they want the danger and they want the excitement. I mean, I hate to tell them it's not like that every day. It's like that 10% of the time. But I bring that up because as much as we know, I mean, we know there's a problem with men, and men, I gotta say, women are outpacing you when it comes to fighting for freedom. There's a lot more of them out there fighting than there are men. Um, but I say that because there is hope. And if that's the hunger they need, then it's up to us, I think, as men, to give them that option of having a crusade rather than a dark campaign, to tame that beast. And that's what they need. They need to let it out. They need to let that inner savage out. And it's really up to older men to direct that energy in a way that doesn't hurt people, but actually helps people while still giving them that adventure that they crave.
Do you think that do you I guess how much of a role do you think the parents play in wanting to protect their children, uh, in that where they don't seem they can't cut the strings, basically, for lack of a better way to say it. Do you think that that's the case? And again, I don't know how involved you are in knowing where these men are that you're around and their parents lives. I'm always shocked at seeing, like, my son's willing to stand up for himself, but like his friends are not. So they'll go to him to go and stand up for the group. And I'm always kind of shocked because he's not like a big guy. He's not an adventuresome guy. He's kind of quirky. But he has no problem saying, hey, this is wrong. We need to do something about it. But they won't. And it's always surprising to me at all. They won't even go with him. Do you see it kind of, do you blame the parents in that part, or do you blame video games or the social media world? Where would you lay the cause, or at least one of the causes or contributing cause of
Yes, to all of that.
that?
Um, Look, I think the parents are to blame, but yeah, at the same time, I think once kids turn around 12, 13, 14, they really are more masters of their environment. They know right from wrong. Um, and I think I would blame it all because, like, first of all, I blame the kid because they have to take responsibility. I was very young. I grew up in a restaurant industry as well, and I had a tough Irish dad. And if I wanted money, I had to go wash dishes at the donut shop when I was like 8 at 4 in the morning. And I learned, okay, this is my responsibility to get this. So, but I had a role model too. So, like, that's when the parents come in. But then again, parents are busy. Okay. We had, a government take away their ability to make income. So I know single parents, they don't have time, especially if they're working two jobs. So that's where friends are to blame as well. We're friends that reinforce each other, that sort of thing. But then also neighbors and communities need to jump in where there might not be parents, and take that kid aside and say, hey man, that is not the way to go. I mean, I was lucky. I had a giant Irish family, with a very nuclear family. My dad wasn't a great role model for the heart, but for being a man, yeah, there's like there was no nonsense. And whereas my mom gave me the other, but I also had brothers and sisters who were sometimes jerks as negative reinforcers, and sometimes I was, but also positive. So it can be recreated in a community. It's just that people have got to be willing to give up their own time for others, and it's going to pay off in the long run because honestly, there's going to be less dangerous, misguided youth out there. People need structure, and I think from all those things you mentioned, those things all provide a framework for a human being to operate within. When those things are not there, it's kind of like letting a animal who's never been out of a cage. It's going to run, it's going to bite birds, it's going to do its business in the corner. It's because it doesn't know any better. And I hate to liken humans to animals, but we are
Sure.
to
Yeah.
some degree. In terms of if we don't have that framework, and we have to give each other that framework. Even today, like I will ask my friends, and I'm about 50 years old. I'll say, "Hey man, was that too much what I said?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, yeah, I think it was." So we're constantly doing that. We even do that on my own podcast to each other. We take shots at each other, but we do evaluate. And yeah, I would just say look around your neighborhood and look for that kid that that kid's lost. And obviously with parents' permission, if they are there, see what you could do. You don't have to like be a big brother, big sister, but you're working on a car, say, "Hey man, could you hold this wrench for me? Can you do this?" Give them a purpose and start building from it.
Hmm. So, it's interesting. The last thing you said was give them a purpose. Do you think they don't even recognize that they want the rights, but they don't necessarily recognize the responsibility and the purpose behind it? Do you think that may be part of when you mention, like Black Lives Matter and that they want to have the rights, they want to have that excitement, but don't recognize there's responsibility attached? Do you think that plays into it, or the purpose that they want to have so desperate, and they're just the other side's just louder?
Yeah, I think to some degree, I think Black Lives Matter is those protest riots, whatever. They're a great example because I knew some of the young people going to that, and they were excited. They thought they were doing something. But one thing they never insisted upon, nor was offered to them by the organizers of these events, was a social contract. If I do this protest, what do I get out of it? And a lot of people will say, well, you should just do it. No, you shouldn't just do anything. There should always be a contract. If I live a good life, Christian social contract is I will go to heaven. I will be near God. If I um, keep my house clean, I won't have leaks. I mean, there's a contract, everything. They never looked for one, nor was one offered. And so there's no place for them to grow. Like, okay, if you do this protest, we'll let you organize the next one, or we will change the laws here, and then you could help us draft the new legislation. And
Right.
none of that happened. And so where the opportunity is for anyone is like, hey, if you help me do this, then I will give you this. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's what will save them. Yes, the other side's louder, but they're also playing on a lot of that frustration. They're also using a lot of technology that people should pay attention to. And I've done some coverage on this on the Gateway Pundit and on Daily Cloud, my wife's site, where they have these CRMs, or customer relationship management systems like Salesforce, where you can mount up these protests and like from your phone from China if you want, and just burn a city down if you'd like. And so people have to pay attention to that, but when they're out there in the street, it's a great time to just pick off the weak ones, pull them aside, and say, "Hey, I got a better, I got a better way for you to go."
I often wondered on this because after the death of George Floyd, how quickly nationally things were organized. And I'm like, I can't even organize a meeting within my office that fast. And we're all like, within 10 yards of each other almost. Like, I was like, how on earth did it happen so fast? And I reckon for me, I always just kind of thought they were just waiting for the moment. But from hearing you talk about CRMs, is maybe it was a little bit of both. But can you dig a little bit more into the CRMs, because I had not heard that theory before with it, or how that works.
Yeah, so it works like this. You go to the one I covered on that Jim Hoft interviewed me about was called actionnetwork.org. And you go on to there, you sign in, it's as little as $10 a month up to 100, and you can fill your little database in the one platform with all your contacts. You can also request that like be on the lookouts, go out for volunteers, and they'll be flooded into your database. You can then plan an event right on your platform, which depending on your level of subscription, they will send out an email blast. The Action Network will send out the hashtags instantaneously to everyone. And they they also I'm sorry, I'm laughing because it's just like crazy like that this is not regulated, but they also allow you to attach like your Google Drive to upload all of your images. So tell me if this rings a bell. Let's say I
Wow.
want to do a ceasefire protest and I want everyone to have the same matching t-shirts. I can upload my design right to Action Network, which will then, due to their existing relationships, send out those images to the local print shop or t-shirt shop, and they'll be waiting at the place where the protest is at by the time my protesters get there. And oh, by the way, I can also splice in Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash to make sure my protesters get where they need to go and get fed as well.
Oh, wow. That's unreal. So, wow. All right, there
And let
has
me
to be.
add, I just
Yeah,
oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no, please add, because yeah,
Sure.
that you just kind of blew my mind there a little bit on how it works, because it makes sense how it works.
Yeah.
Being in the business world too, I hear a lot of that stuff, but to see that kind of play out, as well as I'm assuming there's tracking data and all that other stuff that kind of has to go along with it as well. But yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Add to what you're
Oh
going to
no,
add.
that's these are it's the same reaction I had when I discovered this, but I discovered it when I was hired by a law firm in DC to look into the Ruth Sent Us protests that occurred after the Roe v. Wade was pushed down to the states by the Supreme Court. And the Ruth Sent Us protests were where the people had the red cloaks and they were outside of Supreme Court justices' homes. One Supreme Court justice had an assassination attempt.
Right.
Um, and so I started looking into the groups that were getting the most coverage. The one I landed on was Ruth Sent Us, and several other outlets had covered this. So I had some good secondary data, but I started really digging into them. And I found opencollective.com. Note the name. Open Collective, which is just like Action Network. And I found for the Ruth Sent Us protest, I found this thing called Vigil for Democracy LLC within that CRM, because you go in there and you have your collectives. So let's say, Brian and Peter want to, save the white pine tree. That's it's Brian and Peter's account, and then we'll have different collectives or different actions. One is Save the Pine Tree, one is Ruth Sent Us, one is um, Ceasefire. Those are the different protests. So it's like that tree account, protest, protest, protest. And then you click into those, you have your whole database of contacts, your hashtags, they'll make them for you. Hit a few buttons and boom, you're off to the races with any protest you want. So I found Open Collective. And do you know that for all of those Ruth Sent Us protests, I boiled it down to three people running all of those. Three people. Um, Most people reported there were four, but one of them turns out to be a fake person, and they used some English heartthrob daytime television star as the avatar. But three people, California, I want to say the middle of the country somewhere, and Florida. These three people were running all of those, all of them, and I don't think they ever went to a single protest.
So okay, what would prevent somebody from exposing it by creating a fake protest for something fake, in a fake area, like um a save the water beetle in the desert type thing. I mean, you know what I'm saying? To and then get out and expose it. I remember a long time ago there was Michael Moore, the documentary. He had a TV show, I think it was called TV Nation or something like that, and he would kind of create a lot of fake stuff. And one of my favorite things he did was they discovered O.J. Simpson's knife to watch the media all swarm and go crazy. And he literally created this huge thing about to expose the media for how ridiculous they were over this. Now, I'm not a big Michael Moore fan, but I always thought he was brilliant in how he was able to manipulate in those areas. So so like, could it not be used to expose itself, to even turn on itself? Because I would think something that big, run by three people, it would be very simple to be able to manipulate it backward. I don't know. Am I overthinking it, or am I underthinking it, I should say?
Yeah. I mean, it's what went through my mind. So the three people don't own Action Network or that. They're just users.
Right.
Okay, so they have an account like everyone else. Um, but as far as the CRM itself, whether it's Open Collective, whether it's Action Network, now there's tons of them popping up. Um, that's the I always say that's the house, right? That's like, the house always makes the money. Like
Right. Right.
they don't care what your protest is, and they're gonna keep going because really, are they doing anything wrong? They're running a CRM. They've relabeled it as, political action, but it's still just a CRM. I think so, and I was where you were at when I first looked, like, oh, we've got to. I actually said save the manatee or something. It's funny how the cute things are always somehow related to water, but and I was thinking the same thing. But then I started thinking, as an intelligence guy and a guy with that career I have of running operations and getting assets, I started thinking, like, what a great source of intelligence for the people who are counter to these protests and these actions. So why not instead use a tool like that? Because anyone can access it as a source of intelligence to get your counter protest going. I certainly don't want to send business to these organizations' way in terms of the CRM, but you don't need to. You could just go in there and see when the next thing's going to happen, and then give a counter voice
I
and
gotcha.
get in front of these protests. And if you're you know dark and shadowy minded like I am, infiltrate the organizations legally, and get the intel and create doubt and fracture them from the inside. I mean, there's a million different operations. So I would say not expose it, let it roll. It's already out there. It's not really
Right.
hiding. But it's a great intelligence source. And I think, just like you said at the beginning of this part of the conversation, you were wondering how they pop up so quickly. Well, that's why, and that's how. But a bigger question that I would ask people listening to this is, why aren't, let's say, conservatives using a tool like this? Why are they almost resistant? And I've found resistance when I've mentioned this. Why are they almost resistant to using a tool like this? That when I've recommended it, I've had people say, well, a lot of people I deal with, they're a little older and everything. Well, I'm going to be older sometime too. And if someone said that about me, I'm like, hey, dude, just give me that. I'll figure it out. I think a lot of people are speaking for their constituents without talking to their constituents about
Right.
what they want. But why not use the technology to counter these and to do our own, take proactive measures for the things conservatives want and different groups want? So that's how I look at it.
Well, the traditional media isn't going to care because it sells. I mean, you get a big protest, that's a good minute on your news. I mean, maybe more. It's a so I can see why they don't really care. They just want to keep having the news on a day-to-day basis. Doesn't matter if it's legitimate, not legitimate. I mean, it's
Right.
and unless you want to expose it from an investigatory point of view, yeah, there's not a benefit to them, and so for them, they kind of enjoy it, I would imagine, at
Yeah,
least from an economic point of view.
absolutely.
Huh.
And it's exposed. I mean, it's out there. It's been well covered. Um, but that's when building our whole parallel economy and ecosystem come in. I mean, a lot of people are who are new to this fight, if you will say, man, I don't even know how we're ever going to get in front of this. I'm like, look how far we've come in 3 years in terms of our own media, our own social media. That's welcome to everyone, not just conservatives, but to everyone. um, and people are using it, and it's growing fast. As a matter of fact, for instance, I believe, like Steve Bannon's podcast, one episode outpaces CNN's entire programming day by threefold in
Right.
terms of audience. And so it's all about perception as well. But talking about the community level, what really matters is the people on the ground hearing the message, not the people glued to their screens. Because I would wager that a lot of people glued to their screens probably aren't leaving their house that much,
Right.
whereas the people voting, the people making physical change, they're outside. They've got jobs, they've got things to do. Um, so I would say in getting out there and not worrying about what social media is saying or if it's getting covered, actually getting out there and getting to the bar, getting to the diner, getting to the truck stops, by the way, is a great source. You're spreading what we used to call in the business whisper campaigns or physical campaigns. We weren't targeting blog sites. We had them, but we were targeting religious community sites, religious sites, the gift shop or the coffee shop at the hospital, the bus stop,
Wow.
where people are going on there and starting conversations, which then spread like wildfire and then make their way onto the digital world.
So you're no longer a conspiracy theorist. You're a conspiracy practitioner, uh, in a way.
I create reality.
No. Well, along those lines, because you say it's well documented, but truthfully, this is the first time I've heard it now, and I consider myself well informed, or at least I did until just now. There, and I would imagine that if I went and polled probably 30, 40 people that I know that's kind of in my circle, I'd be willing to bet that the majority of them would not know about that either. So even though it's well documented, there's kind of the groups that know it, the groups that use it. But
Mhm.
then there's probably I would a large percentage that's going to be in that group that even if they do know it, it seems too overwhelming to know what to do about it or how to respond or how to use it or anything of that nature. And then I would imagine there's still a lot of ignorance about it because again, my news source doesn't only come from the news; it comes from a lot of different avenues. But again, I have not heard this before. So how so you say it's well out there, but is it really? I mean, I don't, or is it just kind of out there more in your circles where you kind of know it? But I don't know about like the average person at the diner or the average person at that gift shop you're talking about. I mean, how does that? How do you get that message out without seeming like you're just lost your mind, like we're in some type of kind of Hollywood sci-fi movie type thing?
Well, first of all, never worry about if anyone thinks you lost your mind, because all they have to do is look to Washington and you will seem relatively sane. Um, I would say we're doing it now. Okay. Like, I was asked to come, you'd invited me on, and I said, sure, before I even knew much about you, had heard of your show, but I was like, sure, yeah, why not? Because I have information, I want to give it to you. You probably have information you want to give it to me, then I'm going to give it to more and more people. But I would say just, you go to those places and you consistently go. I mean, the thing I think what many people don't understand about propaganda, and let's make no mistake, this is a propaganda war we're in. Okay, and I'm seeing every level of it. And I know that architecture. And so what happens is you're counter messaging when you're going to that bar or you're talking to your neighbor, but you have to do it with repetition and redundancy. Repetition and redundancy, because how many times have you heard the big lie, the big lie, the big lie? It's like a drum beat. Okay.
Right.
Or how many times have you heard um, white nationalist? Or and you see the media trying different things, but these all have a rhythm to them, and it's constant, and it's constant. There's even colors associated with them. So what we as individuals can do is so it's not too overwhelming. What I always tell people is research the thing that could adversely affect you directly. Don't worry about Bill Gates. Bill Gates isn't coming to your door with a gun. You know what I
Right.
mean? And I respect the people that there's some deep divers on this research that get mad at me, but I'm like, look, I'm not saying he's not a bad guy. I'm not saying he's not the dark overlord, but I'm not worried about Bill Gates. I'm worried about the dudes with the guns and the vans coming up. I'll deal with him later. But the thing is, what affects you? So a great example, last night we were out with a friend and she said, "Did you hear about what happened at this town hall? This lady came in from the city. Now she's on the town board and they want to give extra powers to the emergency health system where they can make you leave your home and mark your door with a certain color." I'm like, what? Like, this is a tiny town. And that's why I tell people, I'm like, don't, look at the things that affect you directly first. Okay. So like if you're, let's say you're a real left-wing person and someone's breaking into your house with a gun, okay, are you going to get a gun, a hammer, or some weapon and try to defend yourself, or are you going to hop online and try to figure out what social causes led to him having a gun and why you should change the Second Amendment? No, you're going to defend yourself, I hope. And so that's why I tell people, don't worry about the CIA or the DIA or whatever you think it is. Just like I tell my stalker clients, they're like, I think it could be the CIA. I think it could be the FBI. I'm like, I don't really care who it is. He's right behind you. So we need to stop him.
Right.
So think tactically, or act locally. And, you know, and then grow your target database after you make it safely through that. See why, then you can look into the strategic reasons for something so you could get to the core of that reason. But for the average American, what's affecting you in your town? What things are changing? Who's creeping up on your public areas? Why is that special use permit being pushed by this group from out of town you've never heard of before? Those are the battles that matter, because that's where like the CCP infiltrates, that's where HHS infiltrates. They don't stop at the top. They don't start at the top. They start at the bottom and work their way up. So go to where the battle is, go to where the troops are, and that's where you'll find the thing to focus on.
You know, it's interesting that you said that. When I moved from, so I went to law school in Kansas City, and then when I moved back um, to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is where I met the where I lived was on a corner of three house districts, and there was an election about to happen, and I drove by, and there's a guy that I knew, and I saw his signs everywhere every time I drove back and forth to work. So I'm like, I already know who I'm voting for. It was no big deal. I knew the guy, knew where he stood, and I go into the voting booth and I walk right in, and it wasn't my guy. I just happened to be driving through his district. My guy was somebody who I had no idea. I didn't know anything about him, and so I literally just picked a switch and went from there. The guy that I ended up voting for won, and he proposed to have a restaurant tax, which independently was like attacking us personally, for it. And it was such a huge eye opener for me because when you're in college, everything's about national politics, maybe state,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's what you watch. At the time it was only CNN and CNN headline, and then Fox kind of came in a little bit when I was in college, but I didn't recognize the power of the local politics and the local affairs of things. And again, that was still at a state level, and I still didn't miss it. Same thing true with the city. We had a I'm going to call it a sex show, even though it was they called it a drag show, type thing. But it was it
Yeah.
was it
They're all
was
gross.
yeah, yeah. But it was an all ages and all of that. Had no idea. I found out about it watching somebody on Twitter who doesn't even live in the area post about it. And then I was able to contact, our city manager and our mayor and, and people that I knew to have conversations with them about it. But it is incredible how much occurs locally that we have no earthly idea about because we don't think
Uh-huh.
it's important. And local media seems to be irrelevant now.
It's not. That's the thing. It's
Right.
not. When I go to the store, and I've surveyed people about this, well, first of all, it's not, because like Facebook spent a ton of money in 2019, 2020 to buy up local media. So it's not insignificant, because why would they
Right.
care?
Right.
Um, but when I go to the store, like, or even when you're like, if you leave New York City, you come up to our area up in the country, you're going to get that local paper to see what local farmers markets are happening, or whatever,
Right.
local rustic festival is happening. You're not going to pick up, the national news for that. You're going to pick up the local, this town, crier type paper. And that's where real influence happens. And speaking with authority on this, like when I did this kind of work for certain organizations that I can't legally say who they are, but when I did this kind of work, we focused on not the national papers. We focused on things like the program, or I don't know what you'd call it in Islam, but kind of like the Missalets version,
Hmm.
kind of like the Missalet type versions.
Okay.
And or like at soccer games, we'd focus on the game program, getting the influence in there.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's where you get it, because that's what people are going to stick in their back pocket and talk about. um, and so what I say to people is, and there's a million things you could do too, like get all your stuff, your sites you want people to have. I've actually done this before with the Pfizer documents. Is I put a bunch of them on thumb drives. I printed Pfizer on it, and I printed confidential, and then I left a handful of those at every truck stop I went to, knowing that if a trucker picks that up, it's going all the way across the country and spreading. And I could
Huh.
watch the analytics on that spread from the point of drop, and that's called a measure of effectiveness. So, um, get creative, and or just do what they're doing. That's what I tell people: do what the enemy's doing. If it's working, do the same thing, except with your messaging, because the messaging is the most important, but getting out and doing it is the most important. Because, like you said, all the big plans in the world are happening up top, but they have to be executed locally. If
Right.
Health and Human Services wants to lock you down, someone has to physically come and lock you down if you refuse to do it yourself. And that's why the local everything is so important. And they know this. They know this. But I think more people locally, and locals know this, but more people like in cities that stay inside too much, they don't realize this until it's too late. And people need to get involved. And I can ramble on and on, but I think you see my point.
So yeah, and I do. I guess when I think about local news, I think about the news, and my wife watches the local news, and she has it on when I'm getting dressed in the morning, and it's all about their personalities, and it's all about there's a you know this squirrel that looked like something that someone caught on
Yeah,
camera. I mean, and it's just I'm always like, oh my goodness, and out of 30 minutes, why do we need 18 minutes of weather? I can look outside and see, unless there's something dangerous coming, I can look out and say,
right.
wow, it's raining today. I don't need all of that.
Thought about that. That's true. It's a lot of weather locally.
Yeah. And that's kind of why I was saying, I just feel it's ineffective because they don't seem like they cover much. Now I do know
Talking more
this.
about print. I'm talking more about print news,
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
which is largely overlooked. But print news, I haven't watched local news in a long time. Unless I'm on it, then I'll watch it. But um, do you mind if I jump in just to clarify?
Yeah. No, please.
Um, yeah, so I'm talking more of the local news in terms of print, but also you becoming a local news source. So, as an example, I worked at a major Native American reservation with the most successful company on it. It's out in Washington State, and I was running in like security type intelligence operations to get ahead of their enemies, because they do some pretty aggressive types of business practices out there, all legal, but it's different. It's a different world. And so everything from cattle rustling to, stealing things, not my clients, but people doing this to them. But the best source of intelligence, no matter how much online stuff I did, no matter how much access I had, the best source of intelligence was the gossip, the local gossip. And that was just something that no one could crack. And I actually had to spend a year to get really well known and accepted by my client and their friends, to start really getting the gossip. And that's what people have to do. It's like, become part of the gossip, because at the end of the day, people can hear anything they want on national news and believe it. But if you're the guy they know or the girl they know who is sitting there saying, hey, I read that too, here's some extra details that they probably didn't tell you, you're now a trusted source. And then allow them to bring you information, allow them to contribute, because even if it's not good, if people feel like they're part of it now, they're going to love you more. Okay, if they feel like they're helping you and you're not the know-it-all, they're going to love you more, and they're going to want to be part, and they're going to get addicted. And I have done this to a guy we hired from handy.com. He's now a really good friend of mine. He's got like a whole network of people digging stuff. The FedEx guy, we just, that's how I grow these networks. And now they're getting ready to go into, the left side voting polling stations to keep an eye on things.
Huh. We have a diner here, and it's always there's that one table, and you have to basically be invited to the table. People come and go, and it's been that way since good gracious, even when I've visited this town when I was with my father back when I was like in middle school. I mean, that table has always been just different people, different times, and it's they solve the world's problems there at that table, and you're absolutely correct that's an incredible source. I call it a whisper stream. You whisper
Yeah,
into
that's
it and
good.
let the
I like that.
stream take it down. So but
Hmm.
that's pretty fascinating on that. Now, but when you receive the information, and I guess we're almost kind of going back, and we're kind of nearing the end, so but we're almost kind of bookmarking the death threat. Like, how did you determine that? It's that same thing. How do you determine if someone gives you gossip? A lot of times it's, even if it's 80% true, sometimes it's completely false, but I would argue that there's always never 100% accurate, because it's the telephone game. There's something might kind of be missing on it. Do you just make up your mind, I'm going to independently verify it, or I'm going to watch the pattern, I'm going to see, okay, I'm getting 3 of these, and now I'm going to start paying attention? Like, how do you make that determination from there?
Great question. The first thing it has to do is pass what my first special forces detachment commander would say when I gave my intel brief out in the field. It has to pass the who cares test. Like if I went up to him and said, okay, we got bad guys over here, but we also have Bill Gates and he's really bad, he'd say, who cares? And so it has to pass that. Does it matter to me? If it doesn't matter to me, move on. Okay. Save all intelligence, but move on. And then the second thing is, okay, now it affects me. It's talking about the restaurant business. What I'm going to do is, just so I don't offend anyone, is go to go to go to the uh, to take a break and write down just some key points. You don't want to take notes in front of them, but take some key points down. And then when you get home every night, just do a quick search and see if it's got legs and if it's going to affect you. And then if it is a key piece of information, you want to write down a key intelligence topic, new laws affecting restaurants, and then subsequent kicks or key intelligence questions: who, what, when, where, why, how, and try to answer those. In that process, you're going to either get a lot of intel or you're going to get no intel. And if you get no intel, you could probably move on. But if you start getting a lot of intel, you might want to pay attention to it. And then the final thing would be write that question out, like, what can I do? Now, what that means is what's actionable? Like, what can I do? And that's the difference between actionable intelligence and just, history. Can I use this to do something? The information I gave you about these CRMs, that's actionable. You can do something with that. Knowing that Bill Gates is a bad guy, it's not actionable. It's not a lot I can do with that, nor how would it affect me anyways to defend me. So that's pretty much it. In terms of, I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. I think it's very helpful, because I would imagine, especially again, when y'all were looking through all the documents with Pfizer and you were getting all the information plus information from outsiders and trying to make that determination, that was a very difficult chore, just to kind of break it down and to look at it and not have people. I would imagine you got intentionally false information to destroy your credibility as well. And so I would, so in doing so, I would imagine for others that are out there, that especially when they kind of start speaking out, there's a fear factor involved in that, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask that question. I think it's very helpful.
And fear, don't be afraid of fear. Like
Right.
once you overcome fear, I mean, jumping out of airplanes, for instance, terrified every time I went, but man, I felt good the minute I crossed that door. The minute you dive into fear, it's a whole new great world in there. And I would say people shouldn't shy away from it. They should just jump into it if they have to.
I love it. I think that's great and great advice. Well, Brian, again, I greatly appreciate you talking with me. This is I literally had some questions I was like, I'm going to ask, but I never ended up getting to the ones I planned just because it was, I just enjoyed talking with you. This was really, really wonderful. And I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
I'm happy to come back anytime. I enjoy talking about this stuff, and you're a really good conversationalist. So
Well, I do appreciate it. And thank you so much. And hope you get to shoot something or fly something today before you get back to
it's
work.
been raining,
All
so hopefully too.
right. Well, again, thank you so much. I do appreciate it. And let me know if I can ever do anything for you. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Thanks. We'll see you. All right, bye.